program for CAPAL, our first Washington Leadership Program for the summer, and our first in-person program in a few years. So we're particularly thankful that you came out tonight to join us. And thank you to everyone online. Hello for joining us as well. And thanks for your patience. So just a quick poll in the room. I want to see who are our current scholars and interns in the room from this cohort. Just a raise of hands. Oh, awesome. Okay, so I have about 12 of you in the room. And for those who are joining online, if you want to indicate in the chat too as well. And any alumni here, board alumni, scholars and interns alumni. Okay, Christine, Jackie, our panel. Okay, if you noted that, that's great. Okay, I think that is so representative of the connective tissue that is CAPAL. You know, even through, I think, these 34 years of CAPAL's existence, even through a pandemic, you know, we still have folks that are coming back and giving back. And so we're really proud of that connective tissue. We're going to give a few moments for everyone to introduce themselves a little bit, but a few announcements at the top. For those who are not familiar with CAPAL, 34 years of existence, founded as a pathway, as a pipeline to get Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders into the public service pipeline, into the conversation. A few core elements of that program include a scholarship and internship program that many of you are participating in, that have been alums of, a mentorship program, networking in career fairs, and really just general networking for all of us to be together as a community. We're really proud to continue that tradition this year together. As we open this year's Washington Leadership Program, you know, we're really proud to have these be open to the community. So we really encourage folks, you know, that are attending tonight, next week and the weeks to come, the next 6 weeks, bring your friends, bring your classmates, bring your peers. We're going to have fantastic panels starting with tonight and through the next 5 weeks that are really going to be talking about the biggest issues that are affecting Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians. We'd like to grow that audience, and we'd like to welcome as many people as possible to join the conversation. For our second year in a row, this Washington Leadership Program has been designed with, alongside, and by our scholars and interns alumni. So that's something, as you're participating in this program, we're going to be really interested to see how you think we've developed this program. And we're going to ask you to come back and help us, you know, develop future programs as well. And give you the opportunity as well to join panels in the future. There's a few thank yous that we need to hand out tonight because it would not be possible. First is to the DC Mayor's Office of Asian Pacific, I'm gonna get this right, Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, MOAPIA, who very generously provided a grant for us to be here together in person. We also want to thank Bonafide Mass for donating materials to make sure that everyone's safe and health conscious. And as far as tonight's agenda, we're really excited to welcome back Christine Chen, a great friend to CAPAL and co-founder and executive director of API Vote. She's also a CAPAL advisory board member, among many other career accomplishments. Following Christine's remarks tonight, we're going to proceed with today's session, which is AA and NHPI Diaspora and Identity, Careers in Public Service. We have a really esteemed panel that will be moderated by Annie. This session will feature speakers who have pursued different sectors in their public service trajectory. Topics of discussion will include bridging AA and NHPI identity with public service career, how to get involved in public service opportunities, and how CAPAL programming has impacted that journey, and perhaps how other formative experiences along the way have contributed to their experience in service today. Following that program, we'll have an audience survey and a Q&A to you all and to everybody online as well. Okay, and with that, I think it would be really a nice opportunity for everyone to kind of introduce themselves. So if you're joining us online, if you could add yourselves to the chat, who you are, why you're here today, if you're a CAPAL S&I member for this year or an alum, identify yourself, say hello. And in the room, I think let's start up here in the front row with Austin. I think introduce yourself, and if you're an S&I cohort member, why you're here today. Awesome. Thanks, Austin. He's my mentee, so I get to pick on him first. All right, who's next?
My name is Xiong. how I'm also working with the Forest Service, and I'm also working with an organization called Alain Ventures with them. And then, yeah, I'm also I'm curious about what exactly.
Awesome. Welcome, Chen.
My name is Peter. I was assigned to the White House Initiative on AANHPI, and I'm here just to learn more about how I can best use my skills to support the AAPI communities around me, and learn about the experience.
Awesome. Second row.
I have a small little US House of Representatives.
Awesome. Nice and loud for us. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, they can't hear.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Neve. I am interning at the COE, Council for Opportunity and Education. I'm a rising junior at St. Louis University, and I just found this, like, it just popped up on my Instagram Explore page, so I thought it was interesting. And I'm also on the Asian American Association at SLU's executive board as co-advocacy chair. So I just thought this was like an interesting opportunity to see what it's like, so I can bring some ideas back to SLU.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Gao. I'm a rising fourth year at the University of Virginia. I'm studying economics and political and social thought. This summer, I'm interning at the U.S. Senate with Senator Tammy Duckworth, and I'm excited to learn about the experience of diasporic individuals in public service today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Van. I am a rising senior at VCU in Richmond, Virginia. I'm studying psychology and sociology with a minor in education. I'm working with the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm excited to be here to learn more about these topics.
Hi, my name is Zita. I just recently graduated from William & Mary with a degree in global studies and a concentration in Asian and Pacific Islander American studies. I'll be interning at the Asian American Scholar Forum as our policy and programs intern. And I'm just really excited to learn more about the AANHPI community and how I can be more involved with that in my future career.
Awesome. Before we keep going, I just got a note that Shanty has to take off at 7. So I want to make sure we get to our panel. So I'm going to pause us here. We're going to resume this after. I know who you are. I'm going to find you. We're going to get you a mic. At this point, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce a friend to CAPAL, Christine Chen, to kick off our WLP. As I mentioned, Christine is co-founder and executive director of Asian American and Pacific Islander Vote. In 2011, she returned to the EDC to lead the group, expanded API votes to 29 states, really mobilized and drove turnout, and that laid the groundwork for the highest AAPI voter turnout in history. So we're really, really honored and privileged to have Christine join us. Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, CAPAL. Thank you, Colby. And welcome everyone to the summer that's going to change your life, right? So 30 years ago, I was in your shoes. I grew up in the Midwest, went to The Ohio State University, was a student activist at that particular time. But, you know, now thinking back, I realized that I was going through college only 6 years after the killing of Vincent Chen. At that time period, in the late 80s, there was tensions about the auto industry doing really well in Japan, and the American auto industry was not doing as well. And so there was a lot of tension, and the whole idea of hate crimes wasn't even something that we were aware of. And the whole identity of us as an Asian American community wasn't even a concept yet. And it was really because of that, that particular incident that we were able to, as a community, come together and to actually grapple with the idea of like, what is a hate crime? What does it mean to be an Asian American community? What does it mean to actually be together in coalition with other communities of color and other allies working on different issues? I think the issues that we're facing back then are unfortunately the same issues that we're grappling with these days, right? It's just it's manifesting even quicker in a wide variety of different ways with the technology that we have. But the reason I bring that up is that as much as things have changed and our community has grown and there's so much more infrastructure and so much more opportunity for all of you, there's still a lot of things that remain the same. It's true, CAPAL's been around for 34 years. For 34 years, every summer, minus the pandemic years, but like interns would come into town, not even knowing each other, and going into their own internship program. But because of the space that's been created by CAPAL, this is an opportunity for you not to only meet people in your own program, but to meet different AANHPIs in different sectors in the public service area, dealing with different issues, coming from different perspectives. I think it's really special here in DC, because when you're interning in New York or San Francisco, LA, Chicago, or all these other cities, I think because the nature of DC being so tight-knit geographically, and we're such a happy hour town and reception town and different events, you just have a lot more opportunities. And I just want to like throw that out for you to think about that. I know the next 8 to 10 weeks are going to fly by very quickly, but for you to take and grab onto all those opportunities that are made available, because the reality is that things have really changed. Like I said, the past 30 years, I would say when CAPAL was first started, the reason they were created was a few of our friends that were here, they realized that there were not enough AAPIs in the federal government, on Capitol Hill, in the federal agencies, or even in the advocacy space. And they really wanted to make sure that anyone that was interested, or perhaps had never even thought about a career in public service, would actually be provided a space and to be supported. So that way, if you want to develop and be mentored and get connected with others in this industry, that you're able to do that. Since then, when I first started, there was only 4 national Asian American Pacific Islander civil rights advocacy organizations. It was what was called Organization of Chinese Americans, what's now OCA, Japanese American Citizens League, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, which is part of the AFL-CIO, was just getting started. What's now called Asian American Advancing Justice, AJC, just got started, right? CRAC, Southeast Asian Resource Action Center. At that time, they were so focusing on just thinking that the Southeast Asian community and servicing them as refugee communities, wasn't even focusing on figuring out like what does it mean for Southeast Asians as Americans and what are the issues that they'll be facing, right? Eventually, they went ahead and realized and changed their focus, so that way they're also part of this broader coalition that we have. Now, we have about 47 national Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities representing different advocacy issues, representing different ethnic specific community groups. And we're all working in coalition through the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. I want to lay that out there for you because I want you to realize that there's this whole community out there in DC ready to embrace you, that if you want to dig in a little bit deeper and explore how you could get involved, or like how you can actually, dig into a little bit deeper on different issues, that we have all these different institutions for you to actually tap into. In addition, they all are working within broader coalitions in DC. DC does not function without working in broad coalition to be able to move legislation and policies. I know sometimes when we think of the federal level, it's quite challenging these days about how do we move federal legislation. But regardless, it really is about those coalitions that are being built across communities. and working together, not only at the federal level, but also at the state and local level. We're the same organizations, this community that actually created what now is the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. When CAPAL first started, there was no CAPAC, right? And hopefully, on June 22nd, all of you will be joining CAPAL and about 10 other host committee members, where we'll be joined by 400, 500 AAPI interns to meet AAPI members of Congress and to hear from them directly. 30 years ago, there was no Congressional Asian Pacific American Staff Association. Tomorrow, I know we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of that organization. Back then, most of the Hill staffers were all part of CAPAL, and we all got started with our roots in CAPAL. We have someone that is actually interning with the White House Initiative on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. Well, back in 1999 and 2000, it's the advocacy organizations that championed and advocated with President Clinton at that time that we needed an institution like that. We needed to have parity with the Black and Latino communities, where we would have an institute, an initiative to ensure that the federal government was really functioning and working as productively as possible for our community in itself, and to really address all these different issues that are coming up from a public policy standpoint, but also how does that actually get implemented through the different federal agencies. So, even for API vote, back in 1996, I was a staffer within OCA after I interned with OCA. So like I said, I first started out as an intern. Then later on, I decided I wanted to stay in DC, took a job with OCA, and eventually became their executive director. But in 1996, we decided that as our community was growing, we were not being as effective in terms of moving our public policy agenda because our community was not voting at the same rate as other communities. So that's why we created the concept of API vote. In 2007, we spun off from a project of OCA as a standalone organization. And since then, we've been building our political power through increasing voter participation from our communities. We work with local nonprofits, trusted messengers in over 29 states. We work with college student networks and student organizations. So hopefully after your summer here, we'll be able to entice many of you to be our partners as we head into the 2023 as well as the 2024 election cycle. The exciting part of you also being here is that right now, the API community is actually being seen as the fastest growing community in comparison to other communities. Pre-2020, I would say only half of our family and friends were registered and ready to vote. But I am so excited to say that in 2020, we proved everyone wrong. We were able to actually move the needle. We were able to increase our voter participation rate more than any other community. And what ended up happening is that because in 2020, we knew not only did we have a presidential election cycle, it was also once in 20 years that we had to make sure we got counted in the US Census. But on top of that, that same infrastructure, that same network of community organizations at the national and local level, they were the ones that were dealing with the rise of anti-Asian violence and addressing, how do we keep our community safe? They were also the ones that were dealing with the pandemic and making sure that they were distributing PPE and fighting dis and misinformation about the pandemic. And it was because of that, they were engaging with the community on a regular basis throughout the year. I think that is also another reason why our community also understood the importance of voting, because they saw every day that decisions were being made at the local, state, and federal level and how that impacted their lives. That the government, the elected officials making decisions that impacted their lives. And so as a result, we've seen the increase of voter participation, not only in 2020, in 2021, as well as 2022. And that is something that we need to continue to do, especially 18 to 24-year-olds. 18 to 24 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander voters have the lowest voter engagement rate in compared to other communities of color. So there's still, since 2018, we've been on the right trajectory. We've actually been making leaps and bounds in the right direction, but we need your help as we head into the 2023 fall cycle this year, as well as the presidential for next year. And, we have a lot at stake. We know that we hear about what's, especially right now with everyone wearing masks, not necessarily because of the pandemic, but because of all the smokes about the environment. Environmental issues are at stake. Gun control. We've seen a number of different gun shootings that have been happening in California, in Alain, Texas, impacting our communities. The rise of anti-Asian violence, even though it's not necessarily being covered as widely in the news, it's still happening. And sometimes it doesn't even rise to the level of it being a crime, but we know that incidences are still happening within our community. For a number of our community members, crime and safety is also still an issue and that we're grappling with. Education issues. We know that the Supreme Court is going to be coming out with their decision on affirmative action. And it's going to be interesting to see where do we play in this debate, making sure that our community doesn't become the wedge that some forces actually want us to be in dividing up and making this a divisive issue among our different communities. So these are different issues at stake as we head into the 2024 elections. But, with this, your experience here, I just want to really emphasize that with this in the background, you have a lot of opportunities right now. Here's just some things that I just want to remind you as you head into your 8 and 10 weeks of internships. Remember, it's all about relationship building. You have the fortunate to be able to come together, be in person once again. And I will say, especially in Washington, D.C., it is about relationships. I will say now, a number of my former interns, these days when I introduce people and say, oh, yes, they were my former interns. Now I have to actually say they were my former interns like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? But these are folks that are now political appointees, or they're in the private sector, and I'm working with them to get more resources from the private sector into our communities, or they're in the federal government, or a political appointee, or working on the Hill. It's just been amazing to see that the relationships that we built throughout the years are so strong and tight, and how we all continue to support one another. This is also an opportunity to make relationships among your peers, right? These are going to be some of the tightest relationships that you may have heading in, as you head into your career. You're also going to be meeting a lot of potential mentors and people that you can have conversations. We're all very accessible. So it is about how you can actually follow up, making sure that you take those opportunities and don't necessarily just think like you just meet one person, a particular person, just one time, but what type of follow-up are you going to have? What kind of conversations do you want to have? And also think about what is it that you could also provide to that person or to this network of people that you're also meeting. This is also an opportunity for you to experience life. Now, as we reemerge out of this pandemic, what does work look like? What, this type of experience, how does it actually help you figure out what is your passion? What is it that you like or dislike? So that way it can actually help you figure out the trajectory that you may want to take as you go through your internship. It's also about growing yourself as also an adult and living on your own. I remember hearing some folks about, it's like learning once again, like how to live by yourself, not necessarily in a dorm, managing your bills, right? These are the times where in a short time period of 8 to 10 weeks that you could go ahead and do that before you really have to do that once you graduate, right? But at the same time, with these experiences, I also want to remind you, how do you also maximize your time to explore what the city actually has to provide to you? 8 to 10 weeks are going to fly by very quickly, even in terms of the monuments or the things that DC in itself as a city has to offer. I recommend that you make a list of what you want to do and try to calendar it in. Otherwise, I've seen numbers of interns where they're like, oh my gosh, this is my last 2 weeks. And they try to shove all into within a 2-week period. explore different events and organizations and attend different events. I know that a lot of the different nonprofits, advocacy organizations are once again creating opportunities and events, especially on different issue advocacy, focus events for interns actually to be able to participate. Also, I would recommend going beyond your comfort zone, starting conversations. It's really easy because you might also assume that the majority of people that you meet are from out of town. So it's really easy to start that conversation and to really dig in deep on that. And then, like I said, follow up with different individuals that you think that can be potential mentors, or if you just want to dig in a little bit further in terms of how they got to where they're at. Taking initiative is really key, especially in your own offices. I think all of us are trying to I know even with a lot of staff members, they're all trying to relearn, what does it mean to actually have a team of interns? What does it mean to delegate, responsibilities? Well, we're relying on all of you to help us out. We need to hear from you to find out, as you're overhearing conversations in the office, maybe you can imagine yourself helping in some shape or manner. Maybe there's a skill set that we as a manager have no idea that you have. So we need you to actually step up and speak up and to offer what you may actually be able to help us out. Ask questions, take time to understand the culture of your organization, of the office that you are working in. And then, like I said, once again, think through about what type of asset you can actually provide to them. And then lastly, one thing I just want to reemphasize to everyone, once again, it is about developing the friendships. You are the community leaders that we're seeking to energize and to work with us, moving also past this summer. We're hoping that continue to create that relationship with you. And once again, take full advantage that you're going to be exposed to those who are interning at the private sector, on the Hill, as political appointees, working on different campaigns, as well as in different federal agencies. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for coming out today. This is the first step. I know that in the coming weeks, as more interns are coming into DC, this crowd will continue to grow. But now that it's actually a good number of you, I would say tonight, after this event is done, take the opportunity to introduce yourself to other interns, so that way you get to know each other, and also what programs you're actually part of. And hopefully then that will actually emerge different opportunities as you guys continue to experience Washington, DC together. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. We could not have asked for a better opener to our series. Thank you so much for continuing to be a CAPAL friend and champion. I particularly loved the anecdotes about. Yeah. Okay. I said I was particularly loved the anecdote about going to your intern from 20 years ago, who's a political appointee. That is what we're all about, in supporting each other in our development. Okay, Shanty has to hop off, so I think we're going to shoot over to her very quickly, and then I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel. Shanty, floor is yours.
Aloha and good evening. I wanted to first apologize for having earlier commitments, and I had to run to, by the way, I'm here in Philadelphia as a Board of Education member for the state of Hawaii. I'm here to see what we can learn here at the Community Schools Conference, because it is a concept that would really help us bridge the gap, especially coming out of COVID. As a way of a brief intro, my name is Shanty Asher. I am a mother of 3 daughters who are currently, one just exited public education in Hawaii, and 2 are currently in middle and elementary. I am a firm believer in public education, as I was born and raised in the Highlands, born in Pohnpei, Micronesia, and raised in Kosrae. I am always from small communities. And so when I came to Hawaii for for higher education, the biggest challenge I had was integrating into a new system with language barriers and also not being surrounded with the community that would make it feel like home for me. I want to also thank CAPAL for inviting me to this. Having a voice not only within the Pacific Islander community, but especially in the Micronesian community, as a COFA citizen is really important, and I hope there is more in the future. I do not know, I can't see the audience, but I do encourage you to read up on the Compact of Free Association and this very, very unique and special relationship that the United States has with three countries in the Pacific Island, especially in the sub-region of Micronesia. I represent that community, and where I go, I try to really voice the importance of representation. I was actually in DC for the White House Initiative, and I was there at Washington University being on the panel. I am very honored and humbled to be a voice of our Pacific Islander community and our Micronesian community. So being here is a privilege, and I want to thank you for having me. I will say something briefly, especially as someone in public service. I became the first Pacific Islander liaison to the City and County of Honolulu's Office of Economic Revitalization. That role was created during the pandemic. There was a realization that there is a big gap in communicating the resources and everything about COVID to the Micronesian community, especially our Pacific Islanders. And so with advocacy and the need to be around the table so that our voices, our concerns are being addressed, in our culture, it's not really good to be vocal, especially as a woman, but because for our community, I had to step outside of that zone to be a voice. So that role was created, and around the same time, I was nominated by the governor and approved by Ledge to serve on the Board of Education, becoming the first Micronesian on the board. And this is a 12-member board with 9 voting members, and I'm one. With that said, you all have an important role. I do not know the cultural background you are representing, especially our audience, our interns, but have an open mind, an open heart, and be willing to collaborate and partner. Because in the Pacific Islander community here in the US, we do need advocates, strong advocacy from top down and bottom up. So the work you're doing is very important. Even if you're not representing the PI community, you are in this, together, we're going to be stronger and visible together. That's really the hashtag for the White House Initiative. I am a partner, and I want to thank each and every one of you for the work you're doing, and CAPAL for inviting me. I hope that in the future I can be a part of this and not having to rush out. But I want to thank you again and say congratulations to all those who are attending this program. And I hope that in the future I can also help be a bridge to get this information out to some of our Pacific Islanders in Hawaii to be a part of it too. So with that said, I want to say mahalo. Thank you so much.
Shanty, thank you so much for being flexible with our program. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for being a voice and someone that stands up for the PI community and the Micronesian community. We will call upon you to continue to partner with us at CAPAL. And thank you again for joining us tonight. With that, let us head to our panel. I'm very pleased, and please join me giving a warm welcome to Annie Xiao, Chief of Staff at FiscalNote, who will be taking on the night.
Thank you, Kobe. Well, hello, everybody. I can't see those online, but I imagine you've been waiting a really long time for this exciting conversation, so I will dive right in. We have a really good panel here today to share a little bit about the future of AANHPIs and also their work in public service. I would love to invite each of our speakers to briefly introduce themselves and share a little bit about the work they're currently doing. And I would like to start with our online speaker. Courtney, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Courtney. I was in CAPAL in, oh gosh, I should know this, 2018, 2019, one of those. But I'm now a senior associate at Arbor Rising in New York, where I effectively help to incubate early stage nonprofits that are focused on poverty in this tri-state area. Just because I can't tell from the video, can you guys see me or is it just voice?
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, cool. Hello. Wonderful to be here. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Courtney. Alain?
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I was a CAPAL Scholar intern in 2017. Right now, I work for Chamber of Progress, which is a left of center tech trade association that partners with the Googles, the Apples, the Airbnbs of the world. Really fun job. Before that, I worked for Governor Tom Wolf of Pennsylvania for 4 years. And I don't think that I would have had my career path without CAPAL. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alain. And Cassie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie. I use she, her pronouns. I currently work for Dalberg Advisors, which is a consulting firm that works with social impact organizations. And my specific focus is in food and agriculture and in financial inclusion. So I know a lot of CAPAL interns like get staffed with the USDA. So if anyone here is interested in working in food and ag and nutrition, come talk to me.
Thank you. Great. So I have a question for all of the panelists to kick this off. Could you describe sort of what first inspired or drew you to work in the public service, and how would you describe the pathway that led you to where you are today? I would like to start with Alain.
So thanks very much, Annie. So the thing that inspired me initially, honestly, was when I was 12, Obama was running for president. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and they started having the debate about the Affordable Health Care Act. And I realized as a 12-year-old, right, basically they're having a debate about, not to be dramatic, but whether or not I live or die as an adult, whether or not I go bankrupt as an adult. And I became super politically aware just because of that conversation. And because of that, my interest in politics and public service continued to grow. And as someone who has now worked in public service, I've realized, right, you influence a lot of how our world works, and you can really use that as a positive force for change.
Cassie?
Yeah, so I think my public service journey is probably at its beginning and not anywhere near its end. So I would say, honestly, this is not self-serving. CAPAL is definitely what inspired me to get into policy. I ended up at the U.S. Agency for International Development that summer, and saw firsthand, I've always cared a lot about food sovereignty and people's connection to land, and saw how influential governments and like the USDA and USAID are in connecting people to their land and giving people access to food. And so I think, so like I said, my journey is not, it's just at its beginning. I don't currently work in a government office. And I think, if you're interested in thinking about ways, like non-traditional ways to get into public service, I'm happy to talk more about that. But yeah, I would say it was totally my summer at CAPAL exposed me to the power that government has in giving people access to nutritious food.
Thank you. Courtney?
Yeah, so I think there's a longer term answer and there's a shorter term answer, and they are both equally true. And the longer term answer is that, like, my parents were Vietnam War refugees, so there's a whole lot of tie, I think, to policy, to society, to war and peace and justice that I think comes with that. And a lot of context, I think, about that starting from when I was really young. And I think the shorter term answer is that, like, I've never found something, I think, that is as interesting and fascinating and satisfying as social impact work. I can't really remember not wanting to do this. Just this is a sector that is full of problems that are hard and exciting and really worth solving. And at least they seem to me to be like more complex and intersectoral than really any other than anything else that I've found in the world to work on. So I mostly just think it's really cool. And the wins just feel so good, to be honest, that like I am excited and proud, I think, that like most of the hours of most of the weeks of hopefully most of my life. So if I get a long career, get to go towards something that I think is that is really deeply satisfying and aligns with my values.
And Courtney, you talked about social impact earlier. I'll start the next question with you. What would you say has been one of the most impactful moments from your work so far?
Hard question, only because there have been a lot of them, but I think one of the ones that really stands out to me is I did strategy consulting for a enormous women's organization in India, the Self-Employed Women's Association, if anyone's familiar, and they are primarily staffed and run by really like low income women who are working in really difficult situations, generally speaking. It is an incredibly grassroots group. So I spent a lot of time, I think, with the state and national leadership who themselves came from the same population that they were serving. And they just faced, I think, poverty that I can't imagine, barriers that seemed impossible to me from the outside. And because of that, they were really, really burned out. And something that I was able to work on while I was there was, in short, a set of national strategies and approaches that gave them tools and resources that made their work a lot easier. And I think watching the sense of, I think, relief and ease and excitement come in for them as this started to deploy was really, really satisfying for me. They were so inspiring as women and as people to me personally, that feeling like I could contribute something substantial that they really felt and appreciated, that helped them further some really hard on the ground work, combination advocacy and service delivery that affected a lot of people was really satisfying. I felt both part of something bigger and really proud of my own work, and just really inspired.
Alain, I know after your internship at CAPAL, you spent some time working in policy and politics, and now, of course, working for the trade association. So long journey so far in public service. What would you say has been one of the most impactful moments for you so far?
So I mentioned earlier, I previously worked for the governor of Pennsylvania, and we're all in DC right now. And I think in DC, right, there's a big focus on what the federal government is doing. And until COVID, I think a lot of DC people forgot, right? Like governors have a lot of power, state legislators have a lot of power. And at that point, by the time the pandemic had happened in 2020, I was on the governor's senior leadership team. And, it was just 10 of us in a room. I remember the first days of the pandemic, and we had this big whiteboard, and we were just calling out names of businesses that we should shut down. And I remember I got into a fight with my chief of staff about whether or not we should close down laundromats. I was pro keeping laundromats open. And the chief of staff was anti keeping laundromats open. But I remember, like, it's kind of ridiculous, right? We've got like 2 doctors in the room who are advising us, and we're just, policymakers trying to guess what the right decision is. And all the decisions we made during the pandemic, and all of that led into the 2020 election. And I think that's probably been at this point the most crazy and experience I've had in my career so far.
And what happened at the end? Did you end up pushing them toward keeping or closing down the laundromats?
Well, my chief of staff outranked me. So we closed the laundromats for 2 days. Then people got very mad and we reopened them. So I won the argument. Big W.
That was definitely a moment to be very proud of. Cassie, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I can just share a short story. So I worked with the 1 Acre Fund for a while, and they're a nonprofit in East Africa that provides capital. So like loans, tools, seeds to farmers. And so part of the project was helping female farmers get larger access to capital. And I think what was really impactful for me about that was I realized like what it means to really be intersectional when thinking about interventions and how you implement interventions in a way that captures and benefits every single population. And then also, I think when you work in DC and whatever behind, like ultimately you kind of still have a desk job and you can feel very, very far removed from the impact and the people. But I think it's important, and this is what this project taught me, it's important to remind yourself that you are actually really close to systemic power and that can have an impact on so many people. And so I think about that experience a lot because it reminds me to be humble and to be intentional about like all the work that I'm putting into whatever I'm doing.
Now, earlier when Christine gave the opening remarks, she talked a little bit about the lack of representation there was back in the days, especially within the AANHPI community in Washington, DC. And it has, of course, changed a lot over the years. Now, this question is open to any of our speakers. Feel free to jump in if you're ready to go first. Why is representation so important in the public sector? And why do you think AANHPI representation is disproportionate today, still within the public service sector?
I can go. So I want to say that I think representation matters, but it's not just representation. It's what you do with that representation once you're in the room, right? Because you have to remember to go in there and try to fight for your communities and for the well-being of the people that you grew up with, right? When I was in my previous role, I mentioned on the governor's senior leadership staff, I was the only Asian American on that senior leadership team. I was the only son of an immigrant, right? So a lot of those rooms, right? Other people have vastly different lived experiences. And I remember after the Atlanta spa shootings, I was absolutely devastated, right? And I walk into our senior leadership meeting that we have every morning at 8 a.m. and nobody's talking about it. And in my head, I'm like, how are we not talking about this, right? This is like the first major shooting coming out of the pandemic. It's against Asian Americans. And it really blew my mind. And I remember, so we eventually worked on organizing a statement with 26 other governors, all of the Democrats and 2 of the moderate Republicans, or 3 of the moderate Republicans who signed on to condemn the shooting. But that moment in time, I mean, I think it shows you, right, representation matters, right? And we eventually, you can see, right, like across the country, other governors and legislators have taken actions to implement Asian American education programs or try to do things to curb the rise in Asian American targeted violence. But I think that's a perfect example of why representation matters.
Yeah, I can jump in to echo a lot of that. I am consistently the only Asian American in the room, in the workspaces that I'm in, unless I am actually for some reason in Asia. It pretty much is consistent that it's just me. I am surprised if I walk into one of my workspaces and find another Asian American there. And I think the social impact sector, being in it in really any form, any role, does mean that you have power. And like, as you move here through your career, you gain more and more power. But like I am on, my organization has 6 people, and the 6 of us vote on which organizations to fund. We are some of the very few organizations that fund our particular stage of nonprofit, which is sort of post-startup, pre-growth. There's very little general operating support available in that space because the philanthropic sector is the nonprofit sector in the US is generally undercapitalized, et cetera. But that is a space where a lot of nonprofits don't make the jump to the growth stage. There's not a lot of money in it, and hundreds of organizations come across my desk, and me and my little group of 6, in which I am the only Asian American, just vote on who gets funding and who doesn't. And that ends up Like, yes, there are rubrics, yes, there are systems, yes, there are criteria, and it's social impact. Like if this were the private sector, and you could measure ROI of different interventions, it would be a different story. But how do you compare, say, a foster care intervention to a education intervention or one for refugees and asylees? There is a ton of subjectivity that goes into this. And empathy is half muscle in that you can practice it. You can become better at listening and learning and being strategic and making decisions that are good for society and good for communities and responsive to their needs. But the other half of empathy that isn't a muscle is shared experience. And that is uniquely and inherently valuable. So like I'm not in a government position. Nonprofits in general do not command, I think, the same resources and influence that government does. And even then, I am often myself surprised, I think, at how much power I end up ultimately holding, even though I'm not that far into my career. So it is something that I believe quite deeply in.
Thank you. Now, I know most of our online and in-person audience here are students and interns. You know, at some point, you're going to start considering what it will look like when you start looking for a job. So question to our panelists, how do you choose an organization that you believe in and that makes you feel you're having an impact with your work? And then as you're choosing the organization you would like to work with, what is one question or criteria you have when choosing a place to work?
I can start. So I think that when it comes to impact, there's a few things to think about. So things like how direct is the impact? How many levels away from the end beneficiary are you working? What's the scale of your impact? When it comes to whether an organization's values are aligned with your own values, I think there's a few things, at least personally, I guess it probably depends on what your values are, but personally, there are a few things that I like to think about. I think one is how an organization treats their more junior staff members and how they talk about their more junior staff members. Are they treating them like disposable resources or as human beings that deserve to be invested in? I think another thing I think about is how the organization talks about its partners and the people that they work with. So, you know, for nonprofits, private sector, government, they're all working in an ecosystem of beneficiaries and funders. And how do they think about the beneficiaries? Is it in a way that's cooperative and they're mutually benefiting each other, or is it in a way that feels like saviory and kind of weird? I also think about is as like a person of color, as a woman, like, are they going to invest in me as an individual? And am I going to have to work 3 or 4 times as hard as the guy next to me? I look at things like how diverse is senior leadership. If the organization's super white capped, why is it that a bunch of people of color have left very early? I think those are some of the things that I kind of litmus test things that I use to see if an organization has similar values as I do.
Cassie, I just want to say I loved what you said about the way an organization treats its junior staff members. I've found that in my personal career thus far, honestly, everyone I've met who is extremely successful is generally a good and kind person. There's this whole image, right, of the show House of Cards, right, that DC and political work is going to be cutthroat. And there are people like that, right? And some of those people do have power. But honestly, I think that a far more effective way to gain power and advance through your career is by being a good person, getting a good reputation through doing good, hard, honest work, and honestly just being a kind person. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, don't stick around for managers that don't treat you well. It's not, yeah.
Yeah, I will absolutely underline that. I really love that all 3 of our minds went to the same place here. Because like I think a trap I very much fell into earlier on, and that a lot of my peers fell into, is that like we're in this room and in this sector because we are not short on passion. Like wanting to find causes we believe in and work on those is not the area I tend to think that this group needs to work in. But the shadow side to that is that like often people choose jobs and jobs, let's say, based more on the cause being worked on rather than the organization and the way in which it does that work. And that can get forgotten, I think, in that path. So I think the question that I would encourage people here, if you're starting off and looking for a good place to launch a social impact career, would be like, do you really deeply respect and want to learn from not just the cause that is being worked on, but the way in which this organization works? So their approach, their values, their organizational culture. And I think a particular pet peeve of mine in that is that, like, there is this impression that a social impact job means that somehow the career standard is lower, that like you should have a shoestring budget, or terrible benefits, or like limited potential for compensation and promotion, because like that's just how it is in the sector, or like you shouldn't be in it for yourself, you should be in it for the cause. And I'm really happy to see that like impression easing up a little bit and over time, but it's still very much there. So I guess my advice would be to just don't accept that. Like, you should be challenged. You should have career mobility and great mentors, and you should experience excellent management and get compensated fairly and well. And you should work in a culture that like makes you feel deeply supported and brings out the best in you. And just because the sector's undercapitalized and we don't live in an economy that supports this kind of work the way it should, doesn't mean that's not possible to find. It like takes a little more initiative compared to, say, like a lot of private sector careers. But there are really amazing organizations and opportunities out there that both work on powerful things and are themselves really exciting and wealth building and rewarding. So go find those. It's worth it.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, we're quickly coming up on time, so I have just one last question to wrap up here. Panelists, what is one thing you would like the audience to take away from our conversation today? Could be something we have already covered, something we have not covered. It's a lot to marinate there. We've covered a lot.
Yeah, I can try. I think when I reflect back on my summer interning in DC, I was like, oh my God, this is so crazy. My first time in a big city. I'm like from rural Texas. It was crazy. And I think my advice is definitely like take advantage of the summer. And what that means is to talk to a bunch of people. Like, you have the benefit of being an intern, which means like you kind of have an excuse to be like, oh, I just want to talk to you and know more about things. Like, people will be so willing to talk to you. Make friends with everyone. I think your advice is good. Be nice to everyone. Your reputation will follow you. So I think that would be my advice in terms of kind of one takeaway from what we've talked about. I think remembering that you are like close to power and that you do have influence and that your influence is really important. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the DC, like grind to the top, whatever, and you lose sight of like what you're actually doing and who, like what you're working towards. So I would say, even though it feels like you're maybe at the bottom of the totem pole, that you actually do have a lot of power and influence, and to use that wisely and to bring other people to the table as well.
I want to say I love everything that Christine had to say in the beginning about, getting to know lots of people, going out and exploring DC. And to add to that, especially since there's a lot of younger people in the room, right? You're young, you should go out, try to meet new people, try out new things, and really try to use this as an opportunity to learn about yourself, learn about DC, learn about all sorts of things. Also, make sure you take care of yourself. Obviously, work hard and do all that, but make sure you get enough sleep. And stay hydrated and all that good stuff.
Courtney?
Yeah, agree with all of that. And I think just to try to offer a broader set of advice, something that was really helpful to me that my manager of my internship while I was at CAPAL told me was thinking of the next few years of a career post CAPAL in terms of skills rather than necessarily in terms of like your next job is probably not going to be the job. Your next the next cause you work on is probably not going to be the cause forever. And what matters more is figuring out what skills you already bring to the table, what skills you feel like you need in order to get to where you want to be later on in your career, and to really just focus right now on learning. Rather than doing, since there is so much to do and there is a lot of pressure, I think, to do things and to have that enormous impact, and just you have time, but your job for now is to figure out how to do that later.
Thank you. I would also like to offer something as well. Also related to something Christine shared earlier, is the power of connection, and just really understanding your surrounding, your network, and really building on those relationships. You know, there's that saying, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And here in DC, it's about who knows you too. So it's also really important as you're navigating your summer internship, introduce yourself to people, connect with anybody you meet, and keep that relationship fresh. I have this practice I've done for a long time. Every year around Christmas, Thanksgiving time, I'll write a personal note to all the people I'm most grateful for and the people I would really like to stay in touch with. And it goes such a long way that you're not just calling upon somebody when you most need them. And you'd be surprised, I've been in DC for 8 years now. And every time I go to an event, I run into someone I have not seen in a really long time. It may not even be someone you intern with or have worked with, but you just don't know who's going to be around the corner next time when you turn. You may need their help, or they may need your help. So it's really important to continue thinking about the relationship in part. And then to the theme of what we talked about today, about the future of AANHPI, the pipeline, and public service, I would say to that end, be open-minded. You know, everybody's path to public service looks different, right? And from what you've heard from the panel so far, you know, as somebody who worked in nonprofit may end up working in a government the next day, or private sector. Be open to opportunities and different ways of how you can continue contributing to public service and being a part of it. So with that, I would like to pass over to Hannah, and I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining our conversation today.
Okay, huge thank you to our panelists for an amazing, inspiring panel discussion tonight. So right now we're going to be moving into the audience survey. So for those of you who picked up a pamphlet in the beginning, if you turn to the back cover, there should be a QR code that will take you directly to the audience survey. We'll also be handing out paper copies as well. If you need a pen, also let us know. We will be handing out pens. So really appreciate your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, especially as we return to in-person programming. Your feedback is really appreciated and really helpful as we continue to try to improve and develop our programming. So we'll be taking around 5 minutes for the audience survey, and then we'll be collecting those and then moving into the Q&A. No worries if you'll still be working on them at that time. Feel free to give it to us at the end of the panel as well. And for all of our virtual attendees, we'll be dropping the link for the survey in the chat box really shortly.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to look cool for the gram. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, you want to get in this picture too? Oh, can we get one with the three of us? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey,
So while folks are filling out the survey, to our virtual attendees, want to give a huge shout out, many of whom are part of our current summer cohort, alumni, current board members, as well as community partners. So if there's anyone who is attending virtually who has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat box and we'll be sure to get to you shortly. So if folks have any questions for our panelists, our moderator, and then also for Christine as well, feel free to drop it in the chat box. And for all of our in-person attendees, don't worry, we'll get to you very shortly. So Lily has a really great question to everybody, all of our amazing speakers here. And she says, how do you find joy in your daily life? So this is for anyone who wants to answer. And Christine, if you'd like to answer, feel free to come up to the podium as well.
I started keeping a gratitude journal during COVID. I feel like it's a little corny, but and as a result, I've started telling people when I'm just thankful to hang out with them, and that brings me a lot of joy. Also, I like to exercise, and that sparks a lot of dopamine. So, that's pretty good.
Oh my God, this is such a cute question. I think one thing that has been hard about being in DC is it feels very transient, and I'm like, it's hard because it feels like people are moving every 2 years, and so it's hard to invest in relationships. And so I've been really intentional about being involved in like DC and its community. So I'm part of like the local community garden, and I'm there every week volunteering. And yeah, there's so much stuff to do in DC that it can feel, I mean, I guess for you guys, it's kind of different because you're only here for a summer, but if and when you do move to DC permanently, I would recommend investing in a few communities that you feel really cared for and that bring you joy. Because I think it's just like another family of people to support you in a new place.
Courtney, do you want to jump in since you're online?
Sure, yeah. I agree. Super cute question. Love it. And I cook giant dinners for my friends. And they also in return cook giant dinners. And we just that it's been a nice ritual, I think, to have for weekend. So just try like absolutely insane recipes. Like I think I did a ube croquembouche a couple weeks ago. So that's fun. And I also have the stereotypical social impact problem in which I do find my work actually really satisfying. And it's been an ongoing issue to try to like find work-life balance when I have the best reason to be a workaholic, which is that it just is really fun and cool. It's satisfying to solve really hard problems and get to meet people whose lives change as a result. So cheesy as that is, I do have issues with actually stopping at 5 p.m. But it does bring me a lot of joy. So jury's out as to the extent to which it's a problem.
All right, awesome. So we have a question from Kiana, and she says, if you have intersectional identities that affect you, can you talk more about it? What does it mean to face different prejudices against like racism, sexism in the workplace, if you have any experience? So this is open to anyone who wants to take that question.
I'm sure all of us could probably speak to the bajillion of experiences we've had with these types of issues. I think in international development, it's kind of interesting and different because I work with a lot of communities in East Asia, and people lived in the US. And so that's like a very weird dynamic to navigate. Concepts of like, what does it mean to be an expert on a subject area that I didn't grow up in? Like people kind of assume that if we're working on a project in East Asia, that I'm going to be a content expert when I grew up in Texas. Like, but also it's like, I don't know, do I want this like white guy to be the content area expert here? So I think within international development, that's been like the most tricky thing for me to navigate, the idea of who's an expert and what does it mean to be an expert, and how do you combine lived experience with kind of like technical knowledge that you might be able to learn in a class.
So I'm biracial. I have a younger brother who also biracial and is gay. I'm type 1 diabetic, so he and I have this joke where we are like, hey, is somebody gonna be racist or homophobic or ableist to us today? Because, you know, I think discrimination can come up in the workplace in different ways. But identity, I think, is something that really guides a lot of my work, almost like subconsciously, right? I mean, someone told me the other day, right, you know, a fish doesn't know that it's swimming in water, right? It just is what it is, right? And I feel like I just walk through the world being who I am, and that affects all of my work.
Yeah, to chime in here, I have been really, I think, really incredibly lucky with the teams that I've worked on, with the managers that I've worked for. I think, felt really supported and accepted in general, particularly in terms of identity. But I am also often the only Asian American in the room. Most of the room is usually white, and usually male. And this applies a little bit less to where I am now, and applied a lot more to when I was more on the international security side, more war and peace. And I think building up my own confidence helped a lot, and like gaining enough work experience that I had proven to myself, I think, that I was useful and skilled and had something to share. That even if I walk in looking like the diversity hire or the token, that I know I have the ability to dispel that, and to dispel it right away. Not that I should necessarily have to, right? But we don't control a lot of those things. So I think really leaning on and developing inner resources to be able to overcome those perceptions when they do show up. Because there have been plenty of times when I have needed to walk into a room and immediately show that, like, I hold some authority here. I am in control. We're here to make a decision. I am leading this. These are the decision rights. And I don't have time, I think, to slowly prove that, or to try to fight for that respect. So building skills in walking in and unapologetically, I think, taking the space that I need to do what I need to do has helped quite a lot.
All right, awesome. So I think for our virtual audience, if anyone has any further questions, feel free to drop it in the chat box. We'll be sure to try to get to you. But now we'll move into the Q&A for our in-person attendees. So if anyone has any questions for our speakers tonight, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll hand the mic over to you.
This is a question for everyone. And hi again, my name is Peter. I just wanted to quickly reintroduce myself. So you touched on this in your sort of discussion and in your questions, but again, like, what are some of the challenges you faced as members of the AANHPI community? How did you get over those obstacles, and what would you recommend us to do if we were in a similar situation?
I actually have had a couple incidents where actually I've had staffers be pretty explicitly racist towards me because of being Asian American. And those situations are always difficult, right? And how you handle it is going to be unique to you and your situation, your workplace. But I think actually I found it really important when that happened to have, I remember this specific incident that I'm thinking of, right? I walked away. I was like, did that really happen? Like, did I just dream that this like happened? I called a mentor afterwards who was Asian American and who was like, this is what you should do. This is how you should handle it. Like, and they were really great about being supportive. So I think developing mentors is really helpful to me, at least.
I think I've experienced a wide gamut of microaggressions, macroaggressions. The thing I just mentioned, that's, I think, a little bit unique to working internationally. And the way I've dealt with it is you definitely, I think it's super, super important to like have mentors and have allies within the organization, people who will fight for you and advocate for you. And I think then they can help you navigate these situations, because I feel like it is very dependent on the organization and their culture, what the best move to do is. And honestly, I think if you consistently are experiencing these things and nothing is happening or changing, you don't have to stay and just like kind of bear through it and be like, okay, it's just going to be like this everywhere. That's not true. There are organizations that will like take accountability and will like levy consequences if you experience these types of things. So I would say, yes, I've experienced them, but like, do not stay around at an organization if they consistently do not address these types of issues.
I don't know if you, oh, sorry. I don't know if you
sorry, go
guys have
ahead.
seen Succession, but you don't have to be a pain sponge.
Yeah, and to add on, I think that like not being willing, I think, to, provided there is space for this, provided you're in a position and in an organization where this is a professionally and otherwise safe thing to do. Be really willing, I think, to step in and educate. Again, it's like, it's not necessarily fair. It shouldn't necessarily be on you, but we live in the world that we live in. And if there is space to step in and explain why that's not okay, explain how you feel and how the event, the incident affected you, to be able to escalate it if you need to and have the confidence to do that. But like, to, I think, have the practice and resources and knowledge to offer someone the benefit of the doubt and give them a chance to do better. Because these things will happen, and sometimes you don't have another authority or someone who can step in for you. Sometimes you don't have an advocate. Sometimes you don't have somewhere else to turn, and it does just have to be you. And I think learning to deal with that in as open and loving a way as possible can help prevent it from happening in the future, can hopefully do a little bit of good in the world. And if it comes to it, go find another place. If it is not an individual thing or an occasional thing, if it's a cultural or pervasive thing, or if it is not safe for you to try to handle it in a way that I think can push away future incidents like that, there are plenty of spaces where that is much less of a problem. And it is a bit of a skill to build, but you can suss that out in the interview stage. You can figure out well before you start a job what it is like to work there, and what you might need to keep an eye out for. And I think developing that skill is really, really valuable.
I would chime in here too. I know I didn't share too much about my background earlier, but one thing I find interesting is, so I've had 3 internships in public sector before I got my first job. 2 of those were both with CAPAL. So as you can imagine, that 6 months of internship with CAPAL meant I was surrounded by people like me, people who understand our language, people who understand what issues that, AANHPIs are facing. It felt comfortable. It felt safe. I go to an event, a topic comes up, we talk about exactly the same thing. People know what we're going through. And then I went to work in nonprofit at a national advocacy organization called National Capacity. We do a lot of really amazing work with local community organizations that are trying to get access to resources and trying to, get resources for civic engagement and a lot of other things. That again felt very safe and comfortable to me because I felt the minimum, all my colleagues understand sort of the common issues we're trying to strive through. We share the same mission. And if something really big happened, we'll sit down, we'll talk together and just trying to process what's going on in our lives. And then I joined a tech company in the private sector, and it felt very different. Now, I am fortunate though that the 3 co-founders of our company are all Asian American. So when I joined a company earlier in the years, about 5 years ago, as a small tech startup at the time, I was not surrounded by people that looked like me, frankly. And it was very challenging because you know, and I will be often wanting to talk about issues that will be coming up. And I feel like I have to explain myself to everybody why I care about certain things and why it's important. Could feel tiring at times, but it was very important for me to do so because they didn't understand because they didn't have the experience or know people that talked about it. But I very openly talked about it if anybody comes up and asks me a certain thing. So I feel, you know, being an advocate doesn't mean you have to be an advocate in the public service space to be able to share the concerns and the voices of those that are more marginalized and underserved. You could be an advocate in any capacity, in any sector, in any jobs that you have, and you can still make a difference.
I really appreciate you saying that because it's brought one additional thing to mind for me that I'd like to share here, which is that if you encounter, I think, a space where you do your best to be an advocate, where there is some incident of racism or discrimination or stereotyping or something else, you try to respond to it in a way that is respectful and inclusive and sensitive, and you get a really bad reaction. That is a giant red flag. Like these incidents will come up, and you should have the space to be able to deal with them when they do. And if you don't, that's sort of the choice between do I stay and try to change things, or do I find somewhere else to go? And a place that can be worth investing in is one that will hear you out when these things happen, and change and learn and become better.
All right, amazing. Well, thank you so much for that question, Peter, and then all these wonderful responses as well. So do want to acknowledge that we are running up a little bit on time. So wish that we could get to all of your questions that we have tonight, but I will go ahead and hand it over to our board co-chair, Colby, to close us out.
Thanks, Anna. Again, let us thank Annie, let us thank Cassie, Alain, Courtney, and Shanty earlier, and Christine for joining us tonight, for opening us up for this WLP. I particularly appreciate that each of you also are an alum of CAPAL in some way or form, whether you're an SNI or a board member, one of our founding members. It's such a testament, I think, to the pathway that we're trying to continue to build that past 34 years and into the future. I think everyone can kind of note the connective tissue that has come back, which is about connection and supporting our community together. So if you enjoyed this first WLP, good news, there's 5 more to come. We're here each Wednesday. We have one break for the holiday break in July, but each Wednesday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern here at Catholic, TBD if there's any other movement there. So stay tuned for us and virtually via Zoom. You can find this there. Next week's WLP is AANHPI Food Sovereignty and Culture, the Politics of Food. We love our food, so it'll be a pretty fascinating conversation. We'll talk about food access and security on the AANHPI communities, especially during the pandemic, as well as the politics of food distribution and the impacts of food on culture and community. So you can register for that session on our website, that same form that you did for this first session, and view all of our upcoming events on any of our social. I want to give a quick, again, thank you to many of our sponsors and supporters. That includes Moapia, Comcast, Bonafide, here, our partners here at Catholic University. But most of all, again, I want to thank the board members and the staff that support our organization. Carmen Chow, who I know is tuned in, my co-chair, who has been a behind the scenes Wonder Woman in supporting this event. Shama and Hannah, who have been our, I think, warriors day to day to bring this program back in person and to make it all possible. So thank you all. Let's give them a big warm round of applause. Thank you to all for tuning in. This concludes our online part of the program. And for those here, we have a lot of food. Please take it home. Please enjoy it and eat it. And let's continue to network with each other to close the night. Thank you, everybody.